We begin with two Native Americans on top of the Brooklyn Bridge, with the New York City skyline in the background. We see the urban decay at the time, and a building getting demolished. Then, a politician, Christopher Vanderveer, a rich real estate mogul, and, as mentioned later, a potential future president, breaks ground on a new development in the area. Christopher and his wife stop by Battery Park on the way home, after doing some coke in the back of the limo, to admire a plaque noting that his family built the first windmill in America. Then, the Wolfen swoop in and kill them. I'm not sure what colonialization revenge porn would look like, but I'm pretty sure it's close to this.
This is all just Indian jive. We've been watching too many cowboy movies.
Also, all similarities to a certain New York City mogul that became president are, I'm assuming, unintentional. He was a public figure at the time, but it's weird to see all the same. If you're a person that doesn't like messaging in their horror, this movie probably isn't for you. But don't worry, just yet. While I do find this movie quite engrossing, I also find that it starts more conversations than it finishes. Other topics like police surveillance, trust fund domestic terrorism.
Wait, give me the stats on 20.
Well, hello. That's Vanderveer's niece.
Have the police pick her up.
Patty Hearst had only been a few years earlier. And even voodooism pop up at different times.
Fraternity ring? Pentagram and a goat. Voodoo. Yeah?
Some of these are teased along for a bit, but ultimately lead nowhere. Red herrings of the time. This also might be due to the original cut of the film being 4.5 hours long. I'd love to see if these themes were picked up in more detail, if ever they released the original cut. In doing research for this, I discovered that there's a documentary currently in production, uncovering Wolfen, and I'm keen to see it when it's available. Until then, you got me, sorry. In 1969, Michael Wadley recorded upwards of 120 miles worth of film, documenting the Woodstock Festival. He would pare that down to 185 minutes, and a definitive piece of art was created. It would go on to win the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature Film, and it would later be selected for preservation in the National Film Registry, for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. It would take another 10 years until Michael was back in the director's seat, and it turned into a long slog of a fight. As mentioned, the original cut was 4.5 hours long. The $11 million budget climbed to $17 million, and studio executives ended up stepping in and removing him at the last minute. But Michael still got directing credit for the movie. Michael would end up taking them to arbitration over his contract, and he would win. Craig Safin was hired to score the movie and was removed as well. James Horner was brought in and had 12 days to do the job. It's noted that you can hear a lot of Wolfen in 1986's Aliens. To add insult to injury, the studio decided to dump Wolfen into theaters without much of an ad campaign, and in his review, Roger Ebert implored people to go see it quickly, noting the lack of support from the studio meant it would have a shorter run in theaters. Concluding his review, Ebert remarked, "Love, thought, care, and craftsmanship have gone into this film, which is now, so to speak, being thrown to the wolves." Wolfen was sandwiched between The Howling and An American Werewolf in London, and marketed as a werewolf movie, which, debatably, it might not actually be. Wolfen never found its feet. The studio didn't even give it a Blu-ray release until 2015. Near the end of the film, we're told that Wolfen might be gods, that the Wolfen target the elderly, the sick, those who will not be missed, that humans and wolves exchange souls. So to me, it still fits in the werewolf realm, but on a much deeper level. Instead of focusing on the transformation, the physicality of man becoming a wolf or a hybrid thereof, Wolfen delves into the spiritual nature of man and animal.
It's not wolves, it's Wolfen. For 20,000 years, Wilson. 10 times your fucking Christian era. The skins and the wolves, the great hunting nations lived together. Nature in balance. Then the slaughter came.
It's fitting that Wolfen would focus on such heavy themes, as Michael's early films, pre-Woodstock, were aimed at counterculture audiences. Some of the themes that stay on target focus on the urban decay, gentrification, and the class system, along with the previously mentioned colonization. It's not afraid to make a statement and has a lot to offer, if you're willing to listen. It does have some questionable use of Native American lore at its core that probably wouldn't pass muster today. But what can I say? 1981 was a different time. Like the previous movie in my series, The Howling, Wolfen is also based on a book. Whitley Strieber wrote The Wolfen in 1978. It was his debut novel. Strieber would also write The Hunger and Communion. While the book and the movie differ in many ways, one thing that remains a constant between them is telling part of the story through the point of view of the wolves. In Wolfen, we get the first use of the thermographic effect, later used in the Predator movies, as our look through the Wolfen eyes. Albert Finney plays our lead character, Dewey Wilson, a role Dustin Hoffman reportedly wanted. Finney plays your stereotypical, single, cigar-chomping, alcoholic, New York City detective. And it works here, because we're juxtaposing it against the themes I mentioned earlier. Wolfen, at its core, is a police procedural, and leans heavy on Finney to carry the movie, something he does quite well. Albert Finney had a long and successful career. My touchstones in his work would be Big Fish, Aaron Brockovich, the Bourne movies, and Skyfall. In supporting roles, we get a lot of up-and-coming actors of the time, such as the debut of Gregory Hines and Diane Venora. Edward James Olmos, playing Native American, Eddie Holt. Edward had been bouncing around a lot of television shows at this time. Starsky and Hutch, Chips, and Police Woman, to name a few. As with many horror movies, the location has become one of the main characters. Like a haunted house in a ghost story, the decay of the Bronx is palpable. It supplies mood and inspires that uneasy feeling you get when you know something isn't right. The church featured in the movie was created for the production, and I'm sure it cost a pretty penny, despite its appearance. In Hollywood, it's never cheap to make things look ruined. Near the end of the film, we're given a bit of exposition. I'm not usually a fan of the info dump, but for some reason here, I don't mind it. By this point in the movie, it feels like we've been waiting for someone to sit us down and give us the talk. It's done in such a way that it feels like a part of the climax that follows. The movie begins to play with us, and the last half hour kind of proves that Wadley knew what he was doing and had a plan. I'm not sure how much of these scenes were reshoots, but there's enough callbacks for the rest of the film, conversations we've heard that get turned into visuals, that I'd imagine more of it than we think is original. You might even argue that the theme of police surveillance also comes to fruition in a quite terrifying way. Wolfen is definitely a slower burn of a movie. It keeps you engaged though, and like The Howling, benefits from multiple views. So much of what Wolfen is telling us is still relevant today. For that reason, it gets a thumbs up from me. The movie was onto something. I really enjoyed going back to this movie that quite disappointed me back when I was a kid, when I wanted a stereotypical hairy, slobbering werewolf. In many ways, Wolfen is more terrifying because it's so low-key. It gives you the feeling that this stuff might be closer to the truth than we know. Thanks for watching, and next time, a little film you might know, An American Werewolf in London.